Hello and welcome to Mixologist, the place on the internet thingy where we date carbs. Not in that sense, in the sense that what we're doing in this video is we're trying to ascertain what's the date of manufacture for the carbs. And I've got here quite a good example, which is two List 1850 carbs, which were made decades apart. So now what I'm going to do in this video is to try to give you some pointers of how to identify earlier carbs versus later carbs on this. But before I do that, I need to do like an introduction about certain list numbers for Holley carbs. So basically this sort of style, the 4150, 4160, I divided into three distinct groups, or buckets, whatever you want to call it. Bucket number one, you've got what they call the OEM or factory applications. So these are carburetors that came straight from the factory in certain cars, and for that what you need is really a manual. So let's open a random page. So how about this? So if you've got a list 6470 AAA, it means it's from a 1971 Ford medium duty truck with a 330 engine. So basically, either if you have this truck, a Ford medium duty truck with a 330, you need to look for this list number, or if you have this list number carb, then you know which year of manufacture, because this is the year that it came in the truck. And again, this is just a random page in the manual for illustration purposes only. So those are the OEM carbs. Now the second bucket is the very kind of specialist and I would call racing carbs. So these are kind of different. These are, for example, some double pumpers, or some center squirter 660, 650 carbs, or carbs that were designed to run on dual quad applications. So for them, yes, you can still find them in the manual, but it's certainly much more easy to identify them because they had relatively limited production runs. So therefore that's why it's relatively easy to identify kind of the car they came from and what's the date of manufacture. So now the third bin, if you want, is the carbs that Holley they describe them as universal performance carbs, so or carbs of universal application. And this is the case of the List 1850, which is the most common and mass-produced carb Holley ever made, and they were made from the 60s all the way to today. So therefore they had such a long production run that it's very difficult to sometimes to tell them apart on the dating codes. So let's try. So I've got two carbs here, and they are vastly different in the way that in the date that they were manufactured. So now I'm gonna try and give you some pointers about how to tell them apart. So we need to come slightly closer here. Okay, so straight out of the bat you can see, let's have a look. If I put them here, you can see it. This is a List 1852, List 1855, and as you can see here, the choke tower is quite different between these two carbs, and the vent tubes as well, because the casting of the body is quite different. So you can see here it's got like this lip here, whilst here it's got nothing, and it's got this slightly too elevated vent tubes. And in here you can see the date code, and in here it says 1120. It's the 0 is the year of manufacture, so I am absolutely positive this carb came out of the factory in 1970. Why? The second clue that you need to look out for when you date carbs is this: when they got a flat screwdriver, these were the earlier Holley carbs, whilst later they went on a hex screw. on a hex bolt. So therefore that gives you an indication that this is an earlier carb, so that's what you need to look out for. The other thing that denotes earlier carbs is this sort of casting. So when you see this casting that has this contour here, whilst this one is much straighter, this line, this is a much later casting than this one, so therefore that gives you another clue. The other thing that I don't know if you will be able to see it is that this here, this has got a different seal for the fuel transfer tube in here. So this ones, the earlier ones, have O-ring type seals, and this ones have like a hat type seal that goes on top of the fuel transfer tube. So as you can see, the other thing that is a classic of later style carbs is that the choke flap is held with this system, with these notches here, whilst in earlier ones the choke flap is held with screws. So that's a slightly different system there, you can see it. So this is what it tells you. These are the pointers you need to look out for in an earlier carb. Also, earlier carbs can have a detachable ported vacuum, whilst later carbs like this one tend to just have an outlet from the metering block. So but the other things tend to be quite similar between the series. So you will find kind of over here the base plate is going to be quite similar. The other thing that you may find is that in newer carbs this hole wouldn't be threaded, so if you wanted to put an extra screw in here you wouldn't be able to do that. That's generally the very later carbs which this isn't. So let's have a look. What is the date code in here? Is 0374. So I would reckon this carb, I think it was manufactured in the year 1994. So like 20 years after 24 years after this one, which is 1970. I'm sure this is in the 1970s. So I hope that you have kind of got something out of this. And the reason why carbs are dated in this way is that sometimes because you're doing a very specific restoration, you want the carb to be period correct over you're looking for a carb of a certain period. So hopefully these tips that I've just given you will allow you to either search for the right carb or know if you are getting a car from a certain era and you look at the carb and say, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right, that doesn't fit with the period of the carb. Anyway, I hope you find this useful, and I want to say thank you very much for your comments and for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next episode.